Hey everyone, this is Saz of Saz Speaks. This video is all about ICE, immigration, and what the effects of those things are on our country. The video is definitely a long one, so I definitely encourage you to watch the whole thing if you can, even if you got to break it up into a few small parts. I'm also trying something new out in this video where I'm going to react to a few parts of the debate after the fact. So let me know in the comments if you guys like that and if I should keep doing it. Anyways, enjoy. Hey everybody, I'm here today with Blaze. We're going to be talking about ICE and immigration. Nice to have you here, Blaze.
Pleasure to be here.
Is there anything you want to lead off with, or just want to jump right into it?
Sure, yeah. I want to talk a little bit about my background. I'm an aspiring attorney and currently a working law clerk. I specialize in contracts and torts law, which is civil, but I do also have a good baseline understanding of criminal and immigration law. I am also an instructor and youth advocate coordinator for the Red Cross's International Humanitarian Law Initiative. So I do have classical training in humanitarian law and international law in general.
Sweet. It's a pretty good background for this topic, I'd say. All right. I guess I'll just jump right into it.
Sure.
I'm all for ICE. I love what they do. I think it's beneficial for the country in a number of ways. And as far as immigration, I like immigration, but to me, it needs to be legal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
what I stand.
Well, I am against what ICE is currently doing for three primary reasons. The first one is that it's illegal under American law. Second, it's illegal under international law. And third, it's economically idiotic. And I'll let you choose which one of those three you want me to start with.
Any of them. Go
Well, to
ahead.
start, okay. Oh, sorry, I cut you off
No,
a
you're
little
good.
bit. Well, to start off with American law, a lot of what's been talked about is due process, the idea of the 14th Amendment. Now, I want to just ask. A lot of the conservative argument has been in the logic in the 14th Amendment. It says that all persons born or naturalized in the United States or subject of the jurisdiction thereof are entitled to due process under the eyes of the law. The conservative argument has generally been that under the jurisdiction thereof does not apply to undocumented immigrants. Is that something you agree with?
Yeah, correct, because they're not U.S. citizens.
Okay. So, under jurisdictional law, the idea is usually controlled by personal jurisdiction. Personal jurisdiction is the idea that the courts have the authority to pull someone into their jurisdiction if they meet the minimum contacts doctrine. Now, the minimum contacts doctrine basically establishes that if someone commits a wrong in the jurisdiction, has a sufficient economic tie to that jurisdiction, or has done purposeful availment, which is the purposeful avoidance of a legal duty, then they are able to be pulled into the jurisdiction of that court. So, in the case of illegal immigrants, since the wrong that they are committing, allegedly, is happening entirely in the United States, being illegal in the United States, being undocumented, is a crime in which the damage is being suffered is upon the United States. So, because of that, they are automatically pulled into the jurisdiction of the United States. And when ICE arrests someone, they are exactly what they're doing is they're enforcing that jurisdiction by making that arrest. You can't arrest someone if you're not in their jurisdiction. That's kind of the point of jurisdiction. So by ICE saying, okay, we're going to arrest this individual, we're going to deport them, they're asserting that personal jurisdiction over that individual.
Which you think is incorrect.
Yeah, well, not necessarily, because some of those arrests are lawful, but most of them aren't. A lot of them aren't, which I
Didn't
can talk to in a moment.
didn't you say part of the jurisdiction problem is that they have to be if they're committing a crime,
Mm-hmm.
it's part of that judge's jurisdiction. Like it has to be within that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So them being an illegal immigrant, illegal being the key word here, and in any jurisdiction, that does make it ISIS problem, though. That's the whole point they're here. So up until this point, all the legal jargon he's bringing up is actually true. Like he knows his stuff. It's just his application to the issue that I think is a little bit lacking. To me, it seems it doesn't actually address the issue at hand. It's just kind of excuses and workarounds to the law.
Well, so yes and no. For starters, that doesn't imply federal jurisdiction since it's a federal crime. However, there are state laws that do also govern that. And part of the issue with that is, for starters, being undocumented is only crime if you don't register yourself as undocumented. I know that sounds a bit counterintuitive. I will explain. But essentially, if someone comes over to the United States illegally, that is not actually a crime. That's a civil penalty. What becomes a crime is when you fail to register yourself as an undocumented immigrant. So let's say you have an undocumented immigrant who jumps over the border. That's a civil penalty that's weighed exactly the same as a parking ticket, which is kind of crazy to think about. But if that undocumented immigrant then continues to live undocumented and doesn't go to the court and say, hey, I don't have my documents, I want to go through the process of getting my documents, that is the crime itself. That is when it becomes criminal. And when that criminal act is committed, it is not only committed in the United States, it's committed against the American people in the eyes of the law, even if the damages aren't really that big, technically.
Yeah.
So automatically, jurisdiction is asserted by the courts and is asserted by ICE. Now, you're right, you would say that ICE does have jurisdiction over that. But what that also means is that they are entitled to give due process to those individuals when asserting their jurisdiction. So I'm not saying that ICE cannot make arrests at all. They have for a long time. Obama had one of, I think, the biggest arrests in American history of ICE. Those arrests were plenty lawful. But when making those arrests, he still applied due process. ICE in its current form is not applying due process, which is the primary problem.
In what ways are they not applying due process? Because from all the videos I've seen of like ride-alongs and like ICE officers speaking about what they do, they have a very formulated like plan of how they go through arrests and make sure that they're on specific lists and they're not just picking up random people.
Well, for starters, there has also been several videos of them grabbing people on the streets or going up to random people saying, hey, do you have your papers? Are you documented? There have also been several videos of people of ICE going to people and when they show their documentation saying those documents are fake without actually having evidence to say they're fake or reasonable suspicion that they're fake. There have been several people who are citizens or legally in the United States who had real ID that were being arrested despite that and saying, oh, you're actually not a citizen.
A real ID is really easy to fake though. Like getting a driver's license, that's a real ID. That's
Mm-hmm.
my real ID. But there are states that are just handing them out to illegal immigrants so that they can have a like identification of some kind.
I think I understand what you're saying there. I think what you're getting confused with is temporary IDs.
I want to say it was Wisconsin or Minnesota. I forget which state exactly, but the governor signed into law that anyone could just get a driver's license. So that was therefore allowing illegal immigrants to actually drive,
Mm-hmm.
and it was their form of documentation in the United States.
Okay, well, I don't know anything about that to be honest with you, but even when that does happen, due process still needs to be applied. Now, I know what you said is that they aren't denying due process. However, part of the issue is that an important part of due process is having a hearing by a judge. And a lot of these immigrants aren't getting hearings. They're being shipped to Alligator Alcatraz or other containment, other areas where they're being contained, and their families aren't hearing from them. In fact, there was an article that came out, forgot when, but it was about a immigration lawyer in Texas, and he was explaining that what he has to do to see his clients is he has to drive about 2 hours sometimes because the prisons are put in areas that are so far away from the population that lawyers don't have easy access to them. And a lot of ICE facilities have been denying lawyers access into seeing their clients. Also, part of the issue is Miranda rights. I'm going to assume you're familiar with Miranda
Mm-hmm.
rights. Well, there's a case. I wrote it down. I'm going to pull it up really quick. De La Cruz v. Garland.
Okay.
Now, there's a couple of things in this case. The first one is that it asserted that immigration law is by nature civil until an undocumented immigrant is not registering themselves. That's part of the thing that I was talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
The other part of it is that Miranda rights have to be read to a undocumented immigrant in a criminal context. So if an arrest occurs with the context of, oh, we're trying to get you deported or we're trying to arrest you or trying to prove that you committed a crime, Miranda rights have to be read. And in these cases, Miranda rights have not been being read. So
Okay.
that's one big issue.
Gotcha. So again, here I see this as mainly a deflection. The problem isn't that illegals aren't being read their Miranda rights; it's that they came into the United States illegally. And honestly, if you ask me, illegals like the same rules and laws don't apply to them because they're not a U.S. citizen. If you came into the United States legally, obviously you're going to get the same rules and laws as you would a U.S. citizen, but being here illegally, you forfeit those. When a criminal goes to jail, they lose some of their rights. You're here illegally, you lose some of your rights. And one of those can be the Miranda rights. Well, just from like, let me ask you like from a moral standpoint
Sure.
then, because I can see like the law part of it, how there's like, I don't want to say like overlap, but you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That there's like incongruities.
Sure.
Um, but just like from a moral standpoint, do you think it's like okay for illegal immigrants to be here or like or not?
Absolutely. And I'm going to take history as an example. Are you familiar with the market revolution? You may not be. It's a little bit of a
I
niche
don't.
part of
Yeah,
history.
a little bit.
So I'll explain. Don't worry. The market revolution was essentially the precursor to the industrial revolution. It occurred when materials were first coming over to the United States and mass production was first starting to occur. It was in the late 1700s. It was right before we actually had the industrial revolution. Now, part of the reason why the market revolution was so successful and led so closely to the industrial revolution was because of immigrants. Immigrants were able to come over to the country freely. There was no background checks. They just came in and they were able to work. And the reason we got so many stringent immigration laws that still stand today, like quotas, for example, is because of the Know Nothing Party. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them.
I have heard of them.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the Know Nothing Party, for people watching at home, just for context, was a political party that their primary goal was to stop immigration or limit immigration severely. And they wanted to do that to protect the American culture. And while that party fizzled away, their goal of increasing immigration restrictions, quota laws, all that ended up staying. And so a lot of the issues that we see today, a lot of the immigration laws that we see today are rooted in that.
Okay, but I don't think that really answered the moral part of like, are they allowed? Like, does them being here benefit or harm American citizens
Mm.
from a strictly moral standpoint?
Strictly moral standpoint, I'm going to be honest with you. That's a hard question for me to answer because I'm really more of a legal and economics guy, to be completely
Mm-hmm.
honest. I will try, though, to answer your
Yeah.
question. From a moral perspective, the way I see it is that undocumented immigrants, when they come into this country, they're not taking American jobs. They're taking incredibly low skilled jobs. And I'm sorry, this is dipping into economics,
No,
but
you're fine.
those low skilled jobs, more often than not, they're not jobs most Americans want. And because we have such an advanced economy, we have so many more high quality jobs, those undocumented immigrants aren't taking jobs, more so they're filling jobs that otherwise would go unfilled. And so I would say, from a moral perspective, absolutely. Not only are these immigrants being able to have a better life in the United States, but they're providing for the economy. They're increasing our output. They're making us a more productive society.
So I agree with you that they're going to have a better life here, but I definitely disagree with them helping our output.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just from like the most recent thing I can think of was when Elon Musk was head of Doge. He like all the studies he said the most conservative, and I don't mean like Republican, like the least amount he thought that they were pulling away from American society was like $150.7 billion through various forms of legal proceedings, welfare expenditures, all sorts of things. So they definitely don't help as far as output goes.
Well, for starters, experts have greatly discredited what he was saying with there. And part of that reason for that is because undocumented immigrants don't receive welfare. They can't. They don't have a social security number. You need at least a temporary social security number to get social security benefits.
I don't think social security is what they're talking about, but welfare programs that go out and help. So whether that be food stamps or Medicaid, things like that.
Undocumented can't get Medicaid either. That's also been very much established. Undocumented are not able to get Medicaid because they also need a social security number or a temporary social security number.
I don't think that's 100% true.
That
Can we fact, Brendan,
yeah, let's fact check
I
it.
I have it now. So if I pull up this is from Congress.gov. According to the KFF, eligible non-citizens represent 6% of Medicaid's enrollees under age 65. This is actually from 2023, and we're gonna find 2025.
Sure.
So, yeah.
But that's for non-citizens. That's not for undocumented individuals. Okay. Non-citizens, when they're getting those benefits, they're working usually. Not always, but usually they are.
Okay.
And so undocumented immigrants, they can't do that because if an undocumented immigrant goes to try and get welfare payments, they're probably just going to be arrested for being undocumented. So it just doesn't work
Depending
logically.
On the state,
Can
yeah.
I real quick?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, please.
All right, so I grew up in LA, and from the first 17 years of my life, I didn't have a social security number for the first 17 years of my life. I was able to go to school. It was only up until the point where I needed a driver's license. I got medical care. I had insurance covered on me. They're not asking in these blue states for your social security number. I only needed to get one once I was around 17. And they thought I was lying. They thought I was undocumented. They were asking a bunch of questions, and I gave them all my papers as proof that I lived there. They couldn't even believe it. So yeah, I just like, what's your response to that? Because like if you really think they need all this documentation, I just don't agree with that at all. It's so easy to get around, especially in these blue states.
Well, for starters, can I ask you a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Were your parents undocumented? Were your parents
No,
non-citizens?
they've been living here their whole lives.
Okay, so they're
Yeah.
citizens,
Yeah,
right?
they're citizens.
So under American law, there's this concept called just fortuitous, which is essentially the idea that if you have two American citizens that have a child, even if they have the child abroad, for example, that person can still be entitled to citizenship. There's just more of a cumbersome process to it.
I mean, that's true. That's why I'm not. That's why I didn't get deported to. I don't know where they would take me, but my point with that is that I was able to do stuff without the social security number. So why do you think that these undocumented immigrants would get caught if they were trying to get Medicaid or something like that? Because they're not asking for it.
Sure, that's a good question. Well, part of the issue is that when you have two parents who are citizens, who do have legal standing in the United States, they have more power to be able to say, oh, I have a dependent in my custody. Since I have a dependent, that dependent has an extension of my legal rights to an extent. That's what happened in your case. But in most cases, you have a mother and father, sometimes just a mother, sometimes just a father, who came over to the United States undocumented legally, stayed in the United States undocumented, maybe has children they brought over. Since that parent is not documented, they don't have a legal status to share with their child. They can't claim, oh, just because, oh, I'm legal and my child maybe is a little bit more of a shaky situation, but since they have custody over me, since I have custody over them, I am able to claim a sort of legal standing with that child. That's the big issue.
I hear you, but real quick, they did not need my parents' information. It was purely my information. They didn't know what the citizenship of my parents were. You can file for a driver's license in California as an illegal immigrant, as an undocumented citizen. So, I mean, they really just aren't asking for this stuff. And there's so many people living there. Like, I know people personally. And as much as, like, I love those guys, I love the people that I know, their parents did come here illegally. Like, they're not supposed to come in that way. And me personally, I believe that it should be easier to get into the U.S. legally. I think there's a lot of benefits to immigration, but I don't think that coming in here illegal is the right way. And I think that once President Trump does a good job keeping out people from coming in illegally, I think then we could start opening up the gates and letting a lot of people come in, and then we can have the immigration legally the right way. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
So that's kind of like my 2 cents, and then I'll give it back to him.
Okay.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with what he said. But
I guess you wanted to hear more morals perspective.
yeah, but getting into the economic side, I think, does help with the moral standpoint.
Sure.
So that's totally fine.
So I will say part of my background, I do have some training in economics. I'm a business major and I have taken economics. So I do have a good understanding of economics. My goal is to eventually get my doctorate in economics. So I am decently well versed in economics.
Nice, yeah.
And the reason I disagree with your assertion that undocumented immigrants don't support the productive output is because if you look at the labor market, especially in industries like construction and farming, that labor is not only low quality, but it's also not low quality, but low in skill. It's also a low paying jobs. Sure. And if you take away, let's say, like most of those undocumented immigrants who are filling those jobs, the wage rate is going to increase on those jobs. And the problem with that is then the quantities demanded of those jobs is high while the quantity demanded of those jobs is lower, quantity supplied is higher because more people want to work those jobs, but less companies can afford those jobs. Since they're high, the wage rate they have to pay is higher.
They can still afford those jobs. It just raises the equilibrium price of it.
That's a shift. That occurs in the long run. So no, it does not raise the equilibrium in the short run.
But the long run is where we're heading, which is why it's important. And so it does, the companies would be able to survive that. They just have to increase their wage rate and therefore increase prices, which people are still going to pay for a necessity like food.
Well, yes, but also part of the issue to consider is that when you see those kind of wages increase, especially in an industry like that's so big like farming, and you see the prices of those goods increase, so low-income families would have a harder time affording food, which is a legitimate concern. Also, the other concern is that then the inflation rate increases even more, and it causes inflation to be exacerbated. And right now, we are in a fractionary output gap, which means we're in a recession.
Yep.
And when we are in a recession, doing something that's going to increase the inflation rate is not a good idea. We need to be having policies that will decrease the inflation rate so that we can get closer to go closer to equilibrium.
Didn't we just have, like, for the first time in like a decade, a quarter where inflation went down by like a 0.1%?
I do not believe that's right. I think we could fact check that. I
Yeah,
know
so
you're
I kind of want to circle back
sure.
to his social security stamp, or
Mm-hmm.
his point on that was, if it was so easy for him for 17 years
Mm-hmm.
to go through all those processes, like, then it would seem evident that illegal immigrants could do the same without the social security number that you said they would need.
Well, so like I said, sometimes yes, but the issue is that you're talking about a anecdote, a case study. You're not talking about the whole picture. You're not talking about the statistics. And the statistics say there's not a significant amount of people that are actually able to do that for it to actually put a drain on the economy.
Mm-hmm.
There's an important concept that needs to be taken into consideration called the macroeconomic multiplier. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yep.
Okay, well, for the viewers at home, essentially it's how far money goes in the economy. And if you look at applying the macroeconomic multiplier to the money that undocumented immigrants may be taking in the form of welfare payments, those are not actually taking that much money away from the economy as is going back in. Especially if you take into account the fact that undocumented immigrants, a lot of them work, a lot of them do provide for the economy, a lot of them are spending money in the economy.
So,
And if I can really
yeah,
quickly.
go ahead.
And specifically, welfare payments, whatever form they are, they're called transfer payments. So they don't actually count as government spending under the GDP. However, when an undocumented immigrant or when anyone really spends money from those welfare payments, that goes towards consumption, that benefits the GDP.
So something that I noticed from our conversation, I didn't think of this in the moment, but honestly, anything he or I say about GDP, you should probably take with a grain of salt, and that's just because GDP is actually not really the best like statistic to use to measure economic success, and that's just because GDP only measures the end result of things produced in an economy and not the intermediary steps, which are definitely significant in how an economy is functioning and how its citizens are producing.
So yes, even if we are paying money towards undocumented immigrants, when they spend that money from welfare payments, they are providing for the GDP, they are benefiting the economy. So the argument that they're taking away money from Americans is just faulty.
Not really. So another example I can think of
Mhm.
is, it's not actually in the U.S., but I think the same principle applies.
Sure.
It's Somali immigrants in, I believe it's the Netherlands. It's either Netherlands or UK, and of like the 100% that went there, only 23% are actually like working.
Mm-hmm.
It was somewhere between 23 and 10% were working. I don't remember the specific number. I don't know if they had an exact number, but I mean, just from that, like, I know it's not the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
The number in the U.S. is probably higher, but there's still a trend that illegal immigrants come in, just get the benefits of the new country's, like, I guess infrastructure would be the right word, and don't reciprocate that.
Well, so part of the issue with that logic is, for starters, you're trying to establish a pattern without showing at least three examples, which three examples is what's usually required to establish a pattern.
I have more, but
Okay.
that was just the one that I
Sure.
thought was good.
Then I'll trust that you have those three. I won't press you on that, so we can
Sure.
move on. But part of the issue with that logic is that when you look at the numbers, it's just not accurate. Even if a high amount of those undocumented immigrants going into Denmark or the UK, whichever your example was, even if a high volume of those immigrants aren't actually working, there's a pretty fair chance that those that are working do make up the difference.
Oh, no way.
You don't think so?
You think that one person can fill the GDP void of 10 people by performing, as you said, like a low skill and low paying job?
Well, so it depends. If you think about how the money works there, if you have someone who is living in a country but not working, even if they're receiving welfare and they're spending that money, that's still going towards the economy.
But that welfare could be going elsewhere. It could be going to the citizens of that country who could then use it in these same ways and thereby benefit the citizens and not people who entered illegally.
Okay, that's a good point as well. However, part of the things that we have to consider is that we live in a circular economy. The business cycle is circular.
Correct.
So when you spend money in the economy, even if that could have been spent on someone else or by someone else, that's still going to circle back to them. That's still going to benefit the economy and benefit them.
It may benefit the overall, like, entire economy, but from a person's for like a single citizen's day-to-day life,
Mm-hmm.
maybe that welfare check would have been better spent on them. Not would have, like it 100% would be better spent on the citizen
Mm-hmm.
than the illegal immigrant who just forced their way into the nation.
The problem with that logic is that, for starters, you're assuming that you're essentially trying to employ the argument of the economic pie. I don't know if you're familiar with this argument.
Not that one, no.
It was used in the argument for mercantilism during colonization.
Okay.
Essentially, the idea of the economic pie is that we only have so much money, so you need to try and get as big of a slice of it as possible. What that does not consider is the idea of marginal social benefit in the economy. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I am.
Okay, so I'll kind of give it like a basic idea to the camera. Essentially, what marginal social benefit is that the production of good or the or service that is provided, it either creates a positive or a negative externality. And in this case, when you improve the quality of life for an individual and you can help them be more productive, or you can help at least help support them, that increases the marginal social benefit overall. It creates a positive externality for society. And so, while yes, we could choose to have the mentality of, oh, we should not be supporting undocumented immigrants because that money could be going towards a citizen, that's assuming that an undocumented immigrant has the same propensity to not work as a citizen, which just isn't true. A citizen could decide not to work and just live off welfare, just like a undocumented immigrant theoretically could just live off welfare.
Mm-hmm.
They're both possible. So,
but one's more likely to happen, and the one that's more likely to happen is going to be the undocumented immigrant.
I don't know that that's really true, though. A lot of immigrants, when they come over to the country, they need to work to live. They don't have as much of an establishing in the United States. They don't have as much support in the United States, so they can't really survive off of that.
Well, the example I gave, no, anywhere between 23 to 10% were the only ones that were working. I know for a fact that more than 10 to 23% of Americans work to get by on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm.
So that would show that the undocumented immigrants are more likely to not work.
Well, but again, the issue is that there's a major scale difference. The United States is the third most populous country in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it also, when we also are much more economically powerful, and we also have a much higher cost of living. So there is a lot of consideration in there that just don't allow you to easily translate that statistic from one country to another. Because
Right.
we have a very different country economically than Denmark or the UK. UK is maybe a closer example, but the Denmark especially is a much different country, very different country economically than the United States.
Oh, 100%. But the pattern is still relevant.
I guess you can maybe say it is, but I would also say if you want to go back to the moral arguments, an undocumented immigrant is still a human. Why should we be letting them suffer and die in our country just because they're undocumented? Shouldn't we be allowing them to live? Shouldn't we be helping to get them to a point to where they could work and they could survive?
Sure, but if they come in legally. So that's the big sticking point for me is if we want people to come into this country. I'm not against immigration. As Brennan said before, like I believe there are definitely pros to immigration, but you have to make sure that people that are coming in for the right reasons, and that's that they want to contribute to American society, and they're not just here for like themselves. So I think, as he said, like once illegal immigration is almost entirely stopped and like controlled, then you can open up immigration a little bit more and have, I'm going to call them the good ones. That sounds kind of bad, but you can have the good, productive immigrants come in and produce as you think they are right now.
Now, I want to ask you a question. So, if we take the example of someone who is undocumented, let's say even if they aren't working, even if they maybe are taken away from society, do you think it's beneficial for them to have children in the United States?
For them personally, yes. For the American people, not necessarily.
Okay. Now, I do have a response to that, but I want to maybe ask a little more. What do you think is the reason why it's not actually beneficial to American society for them to be having children in the United States?
I think the cost of education and how much more that takes away from the average taxpayer is a significant thing, because typically they're raised in like Spanish-speaking households for the most part in the United States. So there's significant costs that come to that. I know New York City is a big example of that. They had to spend like $440 million on hiring dual language professors and teachers just to teach illegal immigrants specifically. So I think that's a big reason why.
Okay. Now I'm going to tie this into something that's more in population theory, and that's the demographic transition model. I'm not sure if you're familiar.
You could explain it, sure.
So the demographic transition model is essentially this four-stage model that outlines the difference between increases in population, the natural rate of population, natural rate of increase in population, and just like mostly just a natural increase in population. And what that model shows is the idea of death, of mortality and births, and how that relates to a society's economic development.
Mm-hmm.
The United States is starting to move towards the fourth stage of the demographic transition model, which means that the natural rate of births is going to decrease drastically. It already has been decreasing drastically. And the replacement rate is getting much higher. We need more people. We need more people having children in order to have enough people to sustain our society. I'm going to use Japan as a good example because they are currently in the middle of the fourth stage of the demographic transition model. They have an inverted population pyramid, which means that they have more people who are older, like 50s and 60s,
Right.
than they do who are younger. And that causes a problem for the society because they don't have enough working people.
I'm going to disagree with that because the Japanese prime minister said an almost entire complete ban on immigration.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that because the immigrants coming in, according to the prime minister, were degrading the culture of the Japanese people and thereby making them less productive, because Japan has a super stringent culture on being productive, working while you can, and providing for your family. And the immigrants coming in were destroying that. And therefore, now with that immigration ban, Japan's becoming more and more prosperous again.
I'm going to talk about that because that's actually where I was going to try and go with that. An important issue with that is, since people aren't having enough children, they aren't having enough people to sustain their society and support their society. And while maybe it might have some short-term benefits, it's not going to be beneficial in the long run. And population scientists have very much well agreed for the last 100 years that immigration is necessary, especially as nations progress further, to continue to have a strong enough population to survive. And so while yes, maybe it was eroding their culture, it's also causing them to have a population crisis. And that population crisis is only going to get worse. So in the United States, right now, a part of the reason why we've been able to succeed for so long is that we are a very balanced society population-wise. We are the third largest in landmass and the third largest in population. And the way our society is dispersed has been able to allow us to be fairly productive. But as we start to have less births, as our natural rate of increase starts to decrease, we're going to need more immigrants. And the logic of restricting immigration to try and preserve our culture, partially because that hasn't been an argument that's been made here, but also to try and curve this great replacement theory. I don't know if you're familiar with that or if you agree with it. I don't know if you necessarily agree with it.
I don't know enough about it to have an opinion, but I know what it is, yeah.
Okay, well, essentially, I don't need to really explain great replacement theory. That's kind of just a sidebar. But anyway, if we are to have this attitude of immigrants are a problem, or we need to restrict immigration, or we need to stop the illegal immigrants from coming in, that is going to cause a population crisis sooner or later. And we are starting to slowly move towards a population crisis. Population scientists have been warning of it for years now. This is not new to now.
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of go back to what I said earlier.
Sure.
Of if we stop illegal immigration, then you can expand legal immigration as you see fit to curb that population crisis, as you said. But the priority should be to stop illegal, so you know for a fact the numbers that are coming in, and then you can pick and choose and get the most productive workers that will then help the economy, as you said. And also you get to adjust the number if the population crisis actually does affect us, because especially with all of the new AI and automation that's coming up right now, the population crisis could be completely subverted just by that, because of how much more productive we could be in the future.
Well, I think that's a little bit off topic, so I'm not really going to go into that.
That's
see what you're making on that. But I think important consideration that you may not be thinking about is that a lot of the people that are undocumented or here illegally didn't actually come over illegally. They just overstayed their visas.
That still makes them illegal.
Sure, it certainly makes them illegal, but they still came over the right way. They just didn't stay the right way.
It's still a problem, though. You disagree?
I do disagree, because If your idea is to have the good kinds of immigrants, the right kinds of immigrants, and we're already letting people in legally and they're just overstaying, then maybe the issue is that we just need to make it easier for them to register and stay legal instead of just making the system so difficult to stay legal and so difficult to keep those papers or reapply for your visa that you're not able to.
That could be true, but I think at least as of right now, the system is set up in a way like that it's beneficial for Americans still because like to get your visa, a lot of times people come over to get their visas and they work here for whatever set amount of time, contribute to the economy, but are also sending money back home. That's like the main point of visas, right?
Yeah,
So
partially.
partially, yes. But once you overstay that, you've overstayed what the American government has deemed beneficial for Americans, and therefore it's time to go, unless you can extend it legally and not just overstay and eventually end up harming American society.
The issue is that economically, just looking at it from just like a plain economic perspective, if you take these workers who are coming over and working and then only giving them a set amount of time to work, it makes way more economic sense to just let them stay so there's less turnover in those positions. A lot of positions in construction and in the food industry have high turnover rates, which increases the cost to hire and to produce those goods simply because people have to leave because their visas are expiring.
I think the percentage of people that do that versus just like teenagers and people in their 20s working those kinds of jobs is pretty limited.
I want to clarify, when I say food industry, I mean agriculture. So actually like working in the farms, not
Okay.
like working at Burger King, just to clarify.
Okay.
Yeah.
But still, I think comparatively, and that's not exactly like the working in agriculture, picking berries, or like driving a tractor. That doesn't take a whole lot of training. That's like, I don't know specifically, but like probably what, a few days on the job and you're going to get the hang of it.
Sure. But the reason why it's that way is because it's low paid. And since it's so low paid, most people aren't willing to do that, kind of going back to my original point. And so a big issue with this is that if you try and repel immigration so much, or you try and fight so much against undocumented illegal immigration, you're essentially just saying, oh, well, maybe American people should work these jobs. Maybe we need to find alternative methods for production, alternative methods for labor that we just don't have the capacity for right now.
So, what I found interesting about this was that just a few minutes before, I brought up how AI could help supplement our workforce and make us more productive. And he said that was off topic. And in the moment, I agreed. I was like, maybe that's taking a little bit of a tangent. But he brings up the same application that I was trying to use it for. He said that we could use more help in like areas of production and labor because we don't have the capacity for that to like continue on the trajectory that we are. Um, just thought that was interesting.
So I think that part of the issue is that you're establishing the idea of people need to come over the right way, people need to be legal, but we're not establishing the damages that it causes because there aren't really real damages here. If someone is here illegally, that's just a title, that's just a label. And overall, they're providing for the economy usually. And so the logic that an undocumented immigrant being here just because they're illegal is harmful, it just doesn't really track.
Okay, I'll go back to my original
Sure.
point then, in that like the 150 being the conservative estimate of the net like output. I think you said earlier that they're actually taking away from American citizens. Here, let me
Real quick, while quick fact check.
Sure.
So, you claim that. Sorry, you claim that the employment rate was the same for illegal and documented citizens. It actually is. So it's similar. It's around like 4.1 to 3%. It's kind of like it doesn't really show much difference. However, this is most likely because they can't get jobs, but a large portion of them that aren't considered unemployed, around like 20 something percent of citizens can't get a job. So they're unemployed. They're not technically in the unemployment rate because they're not able to work. But yeah, so the official is around similar between documented and undocumented.
Thank you. I want to go because I remember I said those 3 points. There was a second point that I did not get to, which is that it's illegal under international law.
Okay.
I want to specifically talk about how ICE is being used for enforcement in protests. A big one being the protests in Portland and all around the country.
Yep.
Part of the issue is that Trump is attempting to try and claim there's a war on American soil. Would you agree that that's the case? That there's a war on American soil?
for the sake of this, yes, I'll say
Okay.
yes.
Under international humanitarian law, if you were going to establish that something is a war, for starters, a war has to be a political declaration, and under American law, that comes from Congress, and Congress has not declared official war,
Okay,
so it isn't a war.
I'm gonna go back then. I'm not. I think the term war is it, one of the things Trump does is he uses words slightly out of context to draw awareness to issues. Check out my last video for that topic.
Okay.
So calling it a war, he's not actually like employing military forces like the National Guard in improper ways. He's using the term war to describe more like the feeling and the culture around what needs to be done.
So, in other words, he's saying the feeling or culture that needs to be done is the suppression of a foreign or domestic source of terror. Would you say you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So, would you then agree that he is trying to claim that they are an armed group or that they are engaging in an armed conflict?
Not armed, no.
No. So,
this is going to go back to the war point, I assume.
yes, it is.
Okay.
If it is an armed conflict, then under IHL, in order for it to be considered an armed conflict, for starters, there actually has to be fighting going on with military weapons. There actually has to be guns involved, and there has to be actually death. There really isn't enough. It has to fulfill a minimum degree of intensity, and there has to be a minimum degree of organization.
Okay.
And right now, the protests in Portland have not been organized enough and have not had an intensity enough with conflict militarily to be considered an armed conflict.
Okay.
So under international law, what that means is that international humanitarian law doesn't apply, human rights law applies. And so you then have to ask yourself, is ICE violating human rights law?
Okay, so I'm going to go back and say that this is really just, I think your argument is based on nitpicking the word war.
Mm-hmm.
If you said battle or like struggle against,
mm-hmm.
then I think what you just said completely falls apart.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that he's employing ICE as it's meant to be used. And that's really like the only way I can see it.
So the issue is that you're saying that ICE is meant to be used to quell protests? Is that what you're saying?
It's not that it's used to, they're not even using ICE to quell protests. The protests are meant to quell ICE from doing their job.
Okay, I see your logic, but okay, I guess this is starting to go a little off topic, so I guess we can move towards a different part.
Not really.
No?
No,
okay.
I don't think so.
Then I guess I'll respond. Part of the issue with that is that, for starters, ICE being used to suppress protesters, even if they're trying to stop ICE from doing their job, that would be the job of the police and the National Guard. And the police and the National Guard, when being used right now, they're just being deployed to just observe protests. And I want to go to this. This was an interesting fact that was brought up, not here, but like was brought up in the news. Mm-hmm. During the No Kings rallies that were all around the country, there were 0 arrests from left-wing protesters, 0. But there were about I think it was like 20 or 30 arrests from right-wing counter protesters. That may not be a big number, but that's still telling of the fact that right-wing violence has been much higher than left-wing violence, and right-wing conservatives tend to be more aggressive in how they are trying to support their cause.
Okay, I mean, our first video was entirely on that, and we just go through and debunk that claim.
Okay.
But again, so a lot of the videos I see with the protests going on in Portland, Chicago, New York City, mm-hmm. Is the left. A lot of the stuff I've seen from those protests are like the leftists being violent. I watched a video yesterday from Nick Shirley. He was live streaming in New York City. I think it was anti-ICE, not No Kings yesterday. But as soon as he ended his live stream, Antifa members and other members just from the protesting crowd came by, ran after him, pepper sprayed him just for being there, being an independent journalist. Obviously, he's more conservative, but I mean, no arrests were made there, but that's still left-wing violence.
Okay, I want to go against the point that you said members of Antifa. That's implying they're an organization, which they are not. Oh, that has been proven time and time again. They're an ideology. Antifa just means anti-fascist. There is no leader of Antifa. There is no organization within Antifa.
Yes, there is.
Okay, so what's your evidence of that?
So to be an organization, there's a few key factors, and they meet a lot of them. First of all, they have membership, which is a big part of organizations. They have recruitment. They go around and they have like they have signs that they hand out to people. They do have leadership. A lot of protests. They have people in like the construction jackets, bright reflector jackets. They go around and make sure that people such as ICE, Homeland Security aren't interfering with the like average protesters. That's definitely an organization. They have an ideology behind them, yes, but they have a structure as well. That's why they were deemed a terrorist organization.
Okay. I'm just going to say I'm not an expert on this, but several experts who are experts in terror groups, who are experts in organizations, who are experts in all of that, have very much debunked the idea that Antifa is an organization. And while I may not be an expert on that, I would love for you to fact check that and let me know if you can. But there have been.
I mean, the fact is, like, they are a like deemed by the president. I mean, we could figure out what your definition is. If we can agree on a definition, then sure, we can find out. But you have to find a definition of what a terrorist organization is that you can both agree on.
Well, instead of focusing on a terrorist organization, let's focus on organization. So your definition of an organization is that it has leaders and it has membership. I think part of the issue is that you're saying membership is holding signs. Holding signs is protest.
No, there's I'm not saying membership is holding signs. They go through. I don't. I forget how they do it, but they have recruitment. They recruit specific members to be a part of their organization and do whatever within the organization.
Okay. In order for something to have an organization, can you agree that it has to have a forum? Somewhere where they meet, some kind of discussion forum. It could be online, it could be.
Yeah.
Okay. So what is Antifa's forum? How do they actually communicate that?
They do it online and then through protests.
So saying through protests, when they're forums that they meet online, they're just groups saying, okay, let's protest then, let's protest now. They're usually No King organizers, they're No King rallies. I would be willing to argue that No Kings is some sort of organization to an extent because they do meet some of those criteria. But No Kings isn't Antifa. No Kings is.
Yeah, I'm not saying No Kings is Antifa. Antifa supports No Kings as an organization, but they aren't No Kings. No Kings doesn't have structured leadership. That is an ideology that's spread, and however many people, 7 million people were protesting it on Sunday. That's not a organization because there were no members, no one was recruited to the cause. They saw a thing go around and said, yeah, I support this, I'm going to go protest in favor of this.
So I think what you might be thinking of are like petitions that have been sent out to say, oh, you should petition this or protest this. Are you saying that that's a form of membership recruitment?
I didn't think we were going to go this direction, so I didn't have like facts on it. But what were the videos? A lot of it I saw was with Louder with Crowder. He really went down and like went through how they organize and how they like recruit people.
Well, I would like to just see if we can fact check that because I don't think that they're really actually trying to seek membership because there isn't an organization to seek membership to.
I'm seeing claims, so I gotta find like actual evidence real quick.
Okay.
I have a little bit more,
Cool.
just numbers wise. And then housing crisis.
Sure.
Definitely. So I'll start with
Could you talk on housing? So it sounds like you have something on housing.
Yeah, housing. So according to, this is in New York City in 2023, it was costing officials $385 a night to provide shelter, food, medical care, and social services to an illegal alien family unit. So that means $8 million a day for New York City. And then now the cost has expanded up to 9.8 million a day, which leads to about 5 million or 3.6 billion per year, with that increasing to 5 billion in the near future.
Okay. I think my counter to that would be, but another thing to consider is that immigrants are also very good for the construction industry. And undocumented immigrants take up a huge chunk of employed people in the construction industry. And so if you take away a lot of those immigrants, if you take away most of those immigrants, you're going to see a huge increase in cost to produce houses. You're going to see houses get far more expensive. It's going to cause a construction crisis. And it already is starting to cause a construction crisis. I know I've seen videos and I've seen like people talking about how immigrants are just completely deserting construction jobs, even if they are illegal, just because they're afraid of ICE just taking them even though they're legal.
I think that's mildly absurd for them to think that. I mean, obviously, I'm not in a position where like that's relevant to me personally,
Mhm.
but as I said before, ICE has a very thorough and like extensive form of research they do on people before they go out and like pick them up.
Mhm.
Um, to make sure that stuff like that doesn't happen. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm sure there's instances where it has, but 99% of the time, they're grabbing people who they know for a fact are illegal or are running away from them for that reason.
Well, I will say that I know that's false because there was a report that came out from someone who worked in ICE that was talking about how a big part of their strategy is that when they go to arrest one person, they're primarily looking to see who else they can find in the area who might be undocumented and taking them as well. In fact, in Colorado, which is where I'm from, there have been all around near where I live, there have been huge buses near apartments that are known to have immigrants in them, where ICE will just go into the apartments and just take people and load them into buses, not looking for one individual person or maybe looking for one person, but taking a bunch more people just because they look like an immigrant. They look undocumented. I'm going to use a little bit some personal examples. My mom is a medical professional. She is an immigrant. She is legal. She is a legal permanent resident. However, when she has been out on the job, there have been several times where she's been stopped by us to say, "Oh, are you legal?" And there was even one time where she showed her documentation. They said, "This is fake." So she had to call her lawyer. And
Mm-hmm.
this has happened in many, 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 many times. She also knows several families that are immigrants that she's worked with that have had family who are citizens that were taken. I'm going to give you an example. She had a family that she was treating, who had they were all citizens, and their grandfather was born in Korea, but he got citizenship by being a veteran in the Korean War. He fought in the Korean War, and he was given citizenship from that. He's been a citizen since the Korean War, long, long time. But from getting dementia and Alzheimer's, he no longer could speak English very well. That's a very common thing in dementia, is you lose your ability to speak your second language. Mm-hmm. He was out on a stroll one day, and ICE just took him. They didn't let him call anybody. They didn't let him talk to anybody. He was speaking Korean. They grabbed him. He tried to call his daughter, and she answered the phone, but ICE just threw the phone on the floor and took him. And they haven't heard from him since. This was months ago. He could be dead. ICE just disappeared him. And there have been several reports of that exact thing happening, of family members just being taken. I want to give the very famous example of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, if you're familiar with his case. Mm-hmm. He was taken by clerical error. They thought, "Oh, you're MS-13, you're legal," when in fact he was actually legal. He was going through the legal process. The courts knew about him. He had court dates. He was going through the legal process, yet he was still deported to El Salvador. And even when judges ruled, the Trump administration, he has to bring Kilmar Abrego Garcia back, he refused to. He didn't. And in other instances, judges ordered him to turn planes around that were deporting people, and he refused to turn those planes around. There have been internal memos from the Department of Homeland Security where Kristi Noem has said the president has ordered us to not turn these planes around, even though they could have. So I think your argument that they aren't just taking random people just has been proven false based on several occasions.
That's why I qualified it with like the 99%. I'm sure there are, as you've laid out, unfortunate instances where they do grab the wrong people or don't go by, as we said before, like due process. Mm-hmm. But I also think that this issue in general is like it goes away if there didn't need to be such a large crackdown on illegal immigration. You know what I mean? Like if there weren't people coming in illegally, we get rid of the need for ICE. So by shutting the borders down and doing what we're doing right now, more instances of these things happening, they just go away.
Okay, but then part of the issue with that logic is that Republicans could have done this, but they didn't. During the Biden administration, they had a bill that the Democrats are trying to pass that would have increased funding for border control, that would have hired more border control agents to try and stem the amount of illegal immigration into the country. The Republicans shut it down.
Do you know why they did that?
They did it because they wanted to run on the issue. Do you know why they didn't? They have not said why. Do you happen to have a...
I didn't know that bill was a thing.
It was a thing.
Can we fact check that? Just honestly, I'm like...
would let 5,000 illegal immigrants per day before like they actually enforce something on the border.
I haven't heard that part of it.
Was it the bipartisan border bill?
I don't remember. It was during the Biden-Harris administration. It was the one that Harris talked about it along the campaign trail, where she said that where the bill was going to increase the amount of border control agents, it was going to increase the funding for border control. and Republicans shut it down. Democrats were going to vote for it.
2024 one?
I believe so, yes.
I'd be curious if it had a lot of like pork barrel stuff attached to it as well.
Maybe, and they can check that. I don't know that per
Yeah,
se.
I don't. I'm just curious, like my own curiosity. I kind of want to see what it is, but
Yeah, we can fact check it because
Yeah.
I'm not 100%
I
sure.
have the full fact check.
Oh, cool.
So So we actually found the official bill, like according to
Perfect.
Congress.gov. It says, among other provisions, the bill provides DHS, Department of Homeland Security, emergency authority to summarily remove or prohibit the entry of certain non-U.S. nationals within 100 miles of the southwest land border. But DHS may exercise this authority if they encounter an average of 4,000 non-U.S. nationals within a 7-day period. So that's my guess why they would have voted against the bill. While it did provide funding, like you said, they would only actually go in and remove people illegally crossing if the average was 4,000 through a 7-day period. So I'm guessing Republicans would have wanted that even lower and not wanted that. But that's my guess.
4,000 people in a 7-day period is pretty small, though, especially considering how many people come over the southern border illegally.
I mean, right now it's a lot lower, but under Biden it was around like 10,000 some days. So yeah, I mean, that's just my guess why they.
Maybe if we could do a fact check on how many people are reportedly coming over the border illegally now, that would be nice because I don't know.
Oh, this is illegally.
I know, but illegally.
Oh, you want to know
now?
Okay.
Like, because you claim that more people are coming over the border illegally now than they were during Biden. I don't know if that's necessarily true. So if we could get a fact check on that, that'd be great.
oh no, there's less coming over now because we've expanded, like
Legally,
border.
right?
No, illegally.
Oh, illegally.
Yeah.
I don't. Did we claim that there's more coming over now?
No, he claimed there was less.
Oh yeah.
So I want to get a fact check on that because I don't know if that's necessarily true.
I found the Southwest land border encounters according to the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. In the year of 2024, there was around 2 million in total, probably an average of 150,000 per month. Well, some months reached up to 300,000.
Mm-hmm.
And then so far in 2025, it's only 432,000 with an average of maybe, since Trump getting in office, it decreased from January being 60,000 crossings to February 11,000. And then since then, it's just been 11,000, 9,000, 7,000. So there is a significant decrease because of his policies. But yeah.
All right, I'll let you have that one then.
If you don't mind, I'd like to circle back. We're kind of talking about housing, and you talked about the construction jobs. Like if all of the illegals flee the construction jobs, then more housing can't be built.
Yep.
I think like in New York City, I don't think that's super applicable just because New York City is already so highly developed. I don't think the citizens being there are going to like construct more and bigger buildings in New York City specifically. However, the 57,000 of them that are there leaving would drive down housing costs for people and just free up that kind of space.
Well, that's sort of not true because for starters, there is construction going on in New York. It may not be to build buildings per se, but it can be to repair roads, which is incredibly important. It can be to tear down an old building to build a new one.
Sure, but I'm talking about like the housing specifically.
Sure, and there are a lot of old housing in New York, and a lot of them will get teared down. Also, in New York City, even if like right in the middle of the city there might not be, there may be plenty of room in the Bronx. There may be plenty of room in Staten Island.
Sure.
There's I was just in the periphery of New York City.
I'm sure that's true, but I'm saying right now, if you wanted to alleviate the housing problem, you would get rid of all 57,000 illegal immigrants and people that were on the streets and couldn't afford housing in New York City. Prices would go down. There'd be 57,000 or probably less because it's families. So let's say 10,000 open apartments and like houses. That would be a significant gain to legal American citizens.
Well, I will say on that, part of the issue with that logic is that when undocumented immigrants are living in those houses, it brings down the property value, it brings down the amount of rent that's required, and that also brings down housing prices in the area. Even though it may also decrease the quality, it does decrease housing prices. And
but
so
they would go down further
they would not, because
going back to your macroeconomic point, quantity demanded would decrease, so therefore the price level is going to decrease as well.
Well, not really, because in that case, and this has been shown in real world economics, when you have a lower income people demanding housing, the housing prices have to decrease because of that. But
Correct.
when those
And
go away, housing prices increase.
these are also just being like handed to them though. So city officials are paying for the immigrants themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then now you would have people like lower income people in New York City, I would imagine, that could pay the same price, but instead of it being handed to immigrants, the lower income families are paying for it themselves. And so maybe the price level wouldn't go down, but at least those families that could pay the same amount and not just aren't having it handed to them now have that residence.
The issue is that housing is an inelastic product, which means that since families need it to survive, they're willing to pay pretty much any price for it.
As long as they can.
As long as they can. But if you have people who are undocumented who can't afford those prices living there, prices aren't going to increase. But when those people leave and people who can afford higher prices go in, housing prices naturally are going to go up because of the good being inelastic.
But if they could afford those prices, they would outpay what the city is paying for the illegal immigrants right now, but they can't. So it's just in like 10,000. I'm saying 10,000. I don't know if that's true. I know that 57,000
Use an
illegals.
example, sure.
Yeah. If they can't pay the $385 per night right now, but it's like being handed to illegal aliens, that price, the 385 a night, is going to go down, and therefore American citizens that couldn't pay that 385 are going to pay 280, 300, but it's the housing is going to American citizens and not being just forked over to illegals.
Okay, but the reason I was bringing that up was because you were saying that housing prices would go down, which I was talking about is false. The thing you're bringing up here is a bit of a separate issue. Part of what you're saying here is that you think that I'm going to talk about the second part, not the first part.
Sure.
I'll go back to the first part, but the last thing you said is that it's going to American citizens instead of illegals. What you're then implying is that American citizens are more worthy of that housing than undocumented immigrants.
100%.
Which, going back to what we were fact checked there, since the unemployment rate is pretty equal among the citizens and undocumented immigrants, the productive output is going to be similar, or at least the productivity is going to be theoretically similar.
Not necessarily, because didn't you say that the jobs that illegals are getting are low paying, low effort, not effort, low skill?
Sure.
So it's more likely then that the American citizens are having higher paying, higher skill jobs that are going to benefit society more.
Yes, but also part of the issue is that when an undocumented immigrant is working in the field, for example, they're going to be picking a lot of a product. They're going to be putting out a lot of output quantity wise. But when an American citizen who has a higher end job is providing a service or making a product, that product's going to have a lot lower quantity just because it takes more skill to produce. So while yes, you aren't wrong, since the quantity produced, the quantity supplied is different in those cases, it doesn't exactly translate the same. And while you're right, those American citizens would be making more money. They would be theoretically providing more for the economy because they're spending more since they have more money to spend. Those undocumented immigrants, they are still spending a good amount. And also, what should also be noted is that there are so many undocumented immigrants that they make up a fair chunk of the labor force. And so when you weigh that with the documents with citizens, treating undocumented immigrants unfairly and trying to get them deported, trying to stop them from working, that causes problems to the economy in itself. That is going to cause issues.
I don't think it's treating them unfairly, as you said, because again, they're illegal. I think we're going back to kind of where we started. But sweet. Pleasure having you.
Pleasure, Xander.